In this discussion, I would like to talk about fine art photography, and I'd like to explore whether it is fact or fiction, whether fine art actually exists in the first place, and whether photography is actually part of art. And if it is, and if fine art does exist, then what is fine art photography? This is such an important question, and it's quite funny that we as photographers seem to be more confused than most. In my experience with galleries and art curators, I can tell you that they pretty much know where photography fits in. And interior designers and architects usually have a pretty good idea of what they're designing around and what the value of the art is. And art collectors who spend serious money on photography certainly do their homework when it comes to this subject. And I'll go as far as saying that even traditional medium artists, those who don't even use photography as part of their workflow, also have, in many cases, a better idea than what we as photographers have to where photography fits into the whole scene. So let us unpack this, and by the end of this discussion, hopefully we'll have a better understanding of what is fine art photography and is it indeed fact or fiction. So let's start and have a look at what the internet has to say. So in your search engine, if you type in what is fine art photography, you're going to have a whole lot of different interpretations. Here are a few that caught my eye. The first one says this: fine art photography is a style of photography created by artists. Well, I'm not too sure if that's true, because this implies that artists then took what they do and then put it into photography and then handed it over to photographers to say, well, here you go, you can carry on with it. I don't think that's entirely true. I think there's an influence by artists when it comes to photography, but I think the photographers have been influenced by the artists. It's not that artists have created this style of photography. The second one is this. It says fine art photographs prioritize aesthetics and imagination. Now this too one has to take with a pinch of salt, because this can imply that a photographer who merely picks up the camera to photograph a beautiful landscape, let's say with interesting lighting, has no imagination, and that's not true at all. The very act of taking a photograph already implies that there is imagination. The third one that I saw was this one. It says that fine art photographers create work that goes beyond merely capturing what is in front of the camera. Now this one I do agree with, because I do think that when it comes to art, the camera itself, if considered as a tool to create art, is only part of a process. I think the best definition of them all comes from Wikipedia, and I've mentioned this definition in one or two of my previous talks, but let me give it to you again. Wikipedia says this: fine art photography is created in line with the vision of the photographer as artist. Notice that, and I think that's the right way around. The photographer as an artist. It goes on to say, using photography then as a medium for creative expression. I think that is a pretty good definition of fine art photography, and I think the fact that it's even defined in a place like Wikipedia, and we're seeing so much commentary around about fine art photography on the internet, surely gives us an idea that fine art photography in fact does exist. It goes on to also say that the goal of fine art photography, and this is very interesting, the goal of fine art photography is to express an idea, a message, or an emotion. So fine art photography seems to be something that is a lot deeper than what we would ordinarily see in photography. The definition doesn't stop there. It goes on to say this: simply capturing what one sees in an artistic way is the art of photography and not creating fine art. So this brings up a whole new discussion. Here we can now talk about the fact that we have a thing called fine art, one genre, and another called art photography, another genre. And I must confess, I wholeheartedly agree with this statement as well. But then I decided, why not put the question into AI, which does get its source of information from the internet in any case, but perhaps we'll get a slightly more condensed summary, and in fact, that's exactly what I got. When I put into AI, what is fine art photography? And this is what AI says. Fine art photography is about expressing the photographer's artistic vision through visual striking images, exploring themes and emotions creatively rather than simply documenting reality. That is quite accurate indeed. So to be fair, then we also need to ask the question, what is fine art? So fine art on its own. And the best definition that I could come up with regarding fine art says this. It says that fine art encompasses visual mediums like painting, sculpture, and photography. Oh, hang on, wait a minute. Photography. So photography already exists within the definition of fine art itself. So that means the discussion we're having today is then pointless, because it's not a question of whether fine art photography exists. Fine art photography already exists merely by the definition of what fine art is, and photography has been included in that. So fine art photography encompasses visual mediums like painting, sculpture, and photography, prioritizing creative expression and aesthetic appreciation, distinguishing it from decorative art. Now that's also very interesting, because here we can see there's two genres. There is fine art and there is decorative art. So it's the same as what we're seeing in photography. We're seeing fine art photography and we're seeing art photography. So I think to have a look at where photography's place is in this world of fine art, one has to go back into history. And here I'd like to go back into the 1800s. I think we can learn a lot from history when it comes to what we're struggling with today. So I want to go back to the 1890s. So this is, 65 odd years after photography had been invented. At that stage, photography was becoming commercial. Companies like Kodak and others were already manufacturing cameras and film, and the public was able to buy this equipment and get into photography. And I'd like to talk about a man by the name of William John Newton. He was an artist at the time, and he turned to photography as a hobby, and he absolutely loved what he could do with a camera. And he posed a question that I think really established where fine art photography actually started. His question was this: should not photography be used as a personal expression on par with the other fine arts? I mean, photography had a unique appeal, yes, of course. I mean, for the first time, you could actually freeze reality and capture a moment in time. And for many folk, I mean, it was just the fact that you could do this was already impressive. But now they were thinking beyond that, saying, well, can this thing called photography, this camera, this box that records light and light-sensitive medium that you can record on, can this be a creative form of expression? And absolutely it could, and so it went on from there. And from this question by William John Newton and many others who were also questioning photography's role when it came to art, the wonderful art movement known as Pictorialism was born. Pictorialism, an art movement in photography that emphasizes the beauty, tonality, and composition of a subject rather than just the documentation of reality. And what you must also remember is that photography wasn't embraced by all. I mean, just think of an artist whose livelihood depended on commissions to be able to paint portraits and landscapes and things like that. All of a sudden, this unfair competition turned up where exactly what they would take weeks to do could be done in the matter of a split second and then developed and presented. And I mean, in a way, if you think about it, when was it that Photoshop and digital turned up? It was the early 1990s. It was the same. It was Photoshop wasn't welcomed by everybody. Digital photography wasn't welcomed by all. And now today we have artificial intelligence, and we once again face the challenges of something new. Now, as pictorialism was gaining popularity, there are three standout, what can we call them, pioneers of fine art photography for me. The first is Alfred Stieglitz. I mean, he was an artist, he was a gallerist, and he was very influential at promoting Cubism and Dadaism in his galleries at the time. And when photography came along, he saw the potential that the camera and the photographic process had when it comes to creating art. This is one of his amazing photographs. It's called the Net Mender. And I'm sure you would agree with me. It's got this like soft, moody, what could we call it, melodramatic, almost a compassionate look about it. And I suppose in a way the cameras in the film then, I mean the lenses weren't super sharp and the film itself wasn't the greatest, and it sort of played into the hands of the pictorialists in any case. Edward J. Steichen was another one of these photographic artists and another one of these pioneers. He was also an artist who turned to photography. This is one of his iconic pieces called the Flatron. And I mean, just think back then when, you didn't have everything available that we certainly have today, and especially so when we talk about digital today. But here you're talking about a platinum print that was made out of layers of pigment, and he worked with gamma arabic and potassium biochromate. I mean, not only did you need to be an artist who captured light and a technician to work with this camera equipment, but on top of that, you needed to be an artist in the darkroom as well, as you worked with the chemistries to be able to create this sort of look. In 1910, this particular photograph was put on exhibition with 600 other photographs to promote pictorialism as fine art. And note, to promote pictorialism. Fine art photography was already established. This was just a movement that had grown out of it. And I suppose because photography was rather a difficult medium, not everybody could actually work a camera or understand the chemistries, there was less of a kickback from the public when it came to questioning its art authenticity. Today, because everybody has a camera, certainly those who have a smartphone, and everybody can take a picture, and because it's so automated and because digital is so easy to get into, and we have all this editing software, and we have all of these apps that can make photographs look interesting, there's almost a feeling, and especially so amongst photographers, that it's almost too easy for us to own this thing called fine art photography. And one of my favorite artists to come out of this movement is Leonard Masson. Now, Masson himself, a Belgian photographic artist, was absolutely prolific. And I feel that if I look at all the other artists at the time, he was one of the few who already created a signature to his work. He liked to shoot backlight, and he was an absolute genius in the darkroom as he worked with the bromide process, and he was a master at retouching. And he was certainly a pioneer for the pictorialist movement. When asked one day what is his favorite subject, he had no hesitation in saying wet mud, because it reflects the backlight so beautifully. And then how can we have this discussion without bringing up the name of Ansel Adams, an iconic, famous photographer, and indeed one of my mentors for sure. Ansel Adams was known for his sharp, black and white, punchy landscapes and incredible lighting. His compositions were exquisite, and he was undoubtedly the master of the darkroom. He founded the zone system, which today is still the ultimate control in contrast when it comes to photography. And in 1920, he admired Stieglitz's work. He came up with this quote, and those of you that follow Ansel Adams' work would have to have wondered, why would he have said this? And the quote I'm referring to is this one, where he said, "There is nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept." Well, what you need to understand was, up until the 1930s, Ansel Adams indeed was also a pictorialist. It was only in the 1930s when he became aware of Paul Strand's work, and then later Edward Weston's work, where they were shooting much sharper, much more contrasty, realistic images, that he transitioned from pictorialism over to straight photography. What had also happened at the time, of course, is that the lenses over that short period had got a lot sharper, and the film emulsions and chemistries have got better. So he was one of the photographic artists who founded the F-64 movement. This included the likes of Imogen Cunningham and Willard van Dyke. And Willard van Dyke was also one of those photographers who was so influential in helping to promote photography as a fine art. Can you see that Ansel Adams' change from pictorialism, where everything is soft and moody, over to the new way of photographing where contrast and sharpness was more important, was not a debate whether the one was fine art photography and the other was not. It was simply a change in style. I mean, even if you look at great artists of the time and you look at their commentary, certainly artists like Gustave Courbet, Edgar Degas, Paul Cézanne, I mean, maybe they didn't embrace photography as a pure medium, but they certainly saw the value that the camera and that photography brings to the world of art. And if you do ask the question, what about artists who did embrace photography? Well, then some of the great names still come up. I mean, I'm going to start off with the greatest name of all. Pablo Picasso was known to use photography as part of his workflow. Salvador Dali, the charismatic surrealist, Man Ray, artist and photographer. Andy Warhol, probably one of our most famous pop artists of all time. Both him and Robert Rauschenberg, they use Polaroid as part of their workflow. And then, of course, the 86-year-old David Hockney, who is still with us today. He, too, has used photography and Polaroid as part of his workflow. So then if you're looking for even more evidence on whether fine art photography exists, I mean, look at collectors like Elton John, who has an esteemed collection of investment value fine art photography. And not to mention Andrei Gursky's Rhine 2, I mean, a photographic print that a while back sold for $4.3 million. Now, whether you like the print or not, or whether you get it or not, it doesn't really matter. An investor paid $4.3 million for that print. I mean, you only need to look at institutions that are influential in the world of art today. I mean, names like MoMA and Saatchi, Tate Modern, even the Guggenheim Museum recognize the importance of photography in fine art. And then, of course, there's been a documented increase of appreciation by collectors for this wonderful medium called fine art photography. So let us come back to the question that I originally asked. What is fine art photography? What I'm going to share with you now is my personal view. And I would like to just take out normal photography in this discussion. So let's take out where somebody picks up a camera to photograph something for record purposes or wants to document something, or is even just taking photographs for memory. So let's just put that to one side. And let's rather talk about photography with an artistic intent. So here we're talking about competition photography, portfolio photography, or even a photograph that we sort of print beautifully, enlarge, and we hang it on the wall. That is one genre of photography. The second is art photography. Now, art photography is a little bit different to fine art photography. Art photography is more decorative. Art photography is quiet when you see it hanging on the wall. I mean, it doesn't have a political view. It's not religious. It's not socially challenging. It doesn't have a point of view. So where do you expect to find this type of photography? Well, in places like hotels and in foyers and reception areas, in a company's boardroom, for example, and in public areas. You will also find it within interior decor and design, where the room decor needs to be kept nice and quiet and simple. And then we talk about fine art photography. And for a moment, let's just take the word fine and replace it with bespoke, collectible, and even editioned. And you get a better understanding of what fine art photography is. It's a cut above, really. Fine art photography will deliver a message. It usually has a theme, and in some cases it could either be challenging or even personal. Where do you expect to find fine art photography? Well, just look on the walls of galleries or go onto an online gallery. With fine art photography, you expect to get a certificate of authenticity, and you expect that it is printed or it is created using the highest archival quality materials. So that leads to quite an interesting question. Can a photographic artist who has an artistic intent take a photograph, and that photograph on its own, can that stand up in the world of fine art photography? And of course it can, because it depends on a whole lot of variables. I mean, what is the subject that's being photographed? What is the message that's being delivered because of the photograph? who has been included in the photograph, and who took the photograph in the first place, among a whole lot of other things. Of course it can qualify. There's a whole lot of gray area between photography, art photography, and fine art photography. But as per this discussion, this, in my view, is the three breaking points when it comes to assessing what is fine art photography, what qualifies fine art photography, what is art photography, and what is indeed photography. There's quite a few myths that tend to show up here when it comes to us as photographers trying to figure out where fine art photography actually lives. For some photographers, they truly believe that in order to get into a fine art category, it needs to be bad photography. And it's basically an excuse for technical know-how, and it can be then put into a fine art photography category. And that is not true at all. Others may believe that a good photograph, in other words, an excellent photograph that is technically proficient, excellent lighting, is considered fine art. And that too, as you can see, is not true. Others believe in order to get into fine art photography, you just got to learn Photoshop. Because if you can Photoshop it, it will automatically qualify. Also, what a lot of nonsense. Photoshop is a great tool in photography. It's the modern darkroom, but it's not the excuse for fine art photography. There are others who believe that if your subject matter is not subjective, or in fact if it's not abstract enough, it won't qualify for fine art photography. Again, that is not true. As I've said, a pure photograph can also qualify for fine art photography, dependent on the subject matter and the message that it delivers. I see other photographers claim that once a picture is printed and framed and displayed, it's fine art. No, it's either photography, art photography, or if it's emotive enough, it could be fine art photography. And there's others that believe that if a photograph is up for sale or in fact sells, it is fine art. These are all myths and, in my opinion, utter nonsense when it comes to fine art photography. Fine art photography challenges the conventional. It does not conform to rules, and it embraces experimentation and innovation. Fine art photography is subjective to interpretation. It's complex, emotional, and conceptual, and it blurs the boundaries between reality and abstraction. Fine art photography celebrates individual expression and narratives, and it integrates with technical mastery and artistic vision. And I don't mean to labor the point, but you need to understand that the camera itself, the lens and the light, are essential tools that are used within the broader spectrum of other artistic mediums. So this would include, paint and mixed media and all that sort of stuff. I mean, fine art photography has no boundaries, and it doesn't comply to rules. It's just one of the tools on the workbench to create fabulous art. So now, after this in-depth discussion, here is my definition of fine art photography. It's an imaginative, aesthetic, or intellectual content that expresses ideas or feelings which represent the photographer's vision as an artist. So notice that it represents the photographer's vision as an artist, regardless of the camera equipment, medium, or technique used. It's basically that simple. So just to make sure that there is no misunderstanding, what I am not saying is that fine art photography is the only way. But what I am saying is that you have a choice. You have a choice between photography, art photography, and fine art photography. I mean, there is nothing better than picking up the camera and going out and photographing, and the light comes together and the subject comes together, and one capture you're able to process and present, and it just works. But there's equally another side to photography, where the camera and the photographic process becomes part of an extended range of art media. What I'm trying to say today is that photography is a wonderful artistic-driven medium. And as photographers and photographic artists, we should never have to question whether, firstly, does fine art photography exist, or is photography part of art? As you've seen today, that's not even debatable.